Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the 11th round of the FIDE Canada's chess tournament being held here in Toronto, Canada. Now, yesterday was a rest day after having played 10 rounds of the event. I did compete in Title Tuesday. I did actually win my 69th Title Tuesday in the evening one. But nonetheless, today it's back to the real tournament with the candidates, or I should say the side tournament, depending on how you look at it. And I'm playing against a very, very talented Indian junior player, Ramesh Babu Praggnanandhaa. Now, I played Praggnanandhaa in the FIDE World Cup in August of last year in Baku, Azerbaijan, and I did lose to him in the tiebreaks. He also went on to defeat Fabiano Caruana as well in that event. So he's a player who's very, very young at 17 years old, or maybe 18 now, but really, really talented and really, really dangerous. Now, obviously, playing with the black pieces, we're on the same score. We're both half a point out of the lead. There's some questions whether he wants to be aggressive. Do I want to be aggressive? What will happen? But without further ado, let's jump right into the action. So the game starts with the move d4. Now I'm going to leave some of these arrows on because a lot of people did like them. And here I play the move d5. I can obviously tell the board sounds are not on. So let me change that and make sure they're correct. And now the game continues with the move c or knight f3. Now, after knight to f3, I play knight f6, and he plays move c4. And now we get the first big surprise with this move c5. Now, this is still book move or theory, as you can see from the symbol on the board, but this is what I like to call the classic box. Now, the technical name is the Queen's Pawn Opening Symmetrical Variation, but I like to call it the box because all the pawns here are on the same squares. It looks like a nice little square box. Now, it's worth pointing out that if Pragg had played c4, I still would have played this move c5 anyway, putting the pawns on the same squares. So after knight f3, knight f6, c4, c5, this definitely came as a big surprise to Pragg, which may or may not be surprising because last November when I played in the Chess.com Champions Chess Tour Finals here in Toronto, Canada, incidentally enough, I also played this against none other than the 5-time world chess champion, Magnus Carlsen. Now, Magnus may not be playing this tournament, but he is the best player in the world. And honestly, if this is good enough to play against Magnus, why should I be afraid to play it against anyone else? So I play c5. Now, Pragg uses quite a bit of time here before taking, and after cd4, he decides to take on d4. Now, one of the big advantages to playing a surprising opening like this is that my opponent is using a lot of time. Now, we get to this position here after a6, g3, but I'm already up nearly 30 minutes on the clock. Additionally, this is an endgame. Now, first things first, the reason I play a6 here is that if I were to play e5 right away, White can jump with the horse to b5 and threaten to fork the king and the rook. So I go a6 here to stop the knight from jumping to b5. Pragg goes g3, trying to fianchetto his bishop to g2 and put pressure on the long diagonal. Now I play the move e5, and here Pragg goes knight b3, and I play knight c6. Now again, I did prepare for this tournament in advance, and this is one of the opening surprises that I had worked out, and so I'm still very much within my preparation. Pragg goes bishop g2, and now I play this awkward-looking move a5. Now, one of the reasons I played a5 here, quite simply, is that I want to harass the knight on b3. If I can kick this horse from the b3 square, White is going to struggle in development. For example, say White castles and I go a4 here. If White has to go knight d2, now suddenly you can't develop this dark square bishop, and the rook can't be developed either. So I want to push the pawn to a4, kick the knight back, and stop White from playing, let's just say, bishop g5, followed by, say, rook c1, where White now has perfect harmony with these bishops developed, and the rook on c1, and the knight's actually very, very well placed on top of that. So I'm trying to disrupt the harmony when I play this move a5 here, and now Pragg plays knight b5. Now, it's worth pointing out that I'm still in my preparation. Pragg obviously has used a lot of time here. He's trying to find one of the variations, but he goes for one of the rather tame ones with knight b5. Now, computer wants either castles or knight to a4. Now, obviously, I was prepared for both of these moves, but in view of the fact that I still have one more game to play in this tournament with the black pieces, I am simply not going to reveal all my little surprises. So, Pragg plays knight b5 here, and now I play the move bishop to b4, developing my bishop and checking the white king. Now, it's very important to note here that White cannot castle the king out of check. That would be an illegal move. So White either has to move the king, in which case he can no longer castle, or he has to play this move bishop d2, like in the game. Here I go king to e7, and this is, of course, my classic content moment where I go for the big brain play by playing the bomb cloud by leaving the king in the center. Now, on top of being a great meme move or a great meme opening, this is also the correct move in the position. Now, I could castle a king here, but one thing you want to keep in mind is that when you're playing the bomb cloud, if there are no queens on the board in the bomb cloud opening, you always are happy to have the king in the middle of the board. So with no queens on the board, the bomb cloud becomes much more effective, and in the long run, I can also use this king as an active piece in the endgame. So after king e7, we get a3 from Pragg. I swap the juicers on d2, and now I play the move a4. Now, this is a move that I want to dedicate to the very famous streamer Felix Longjell, also known as XQC. Now, one of the great terms that XQC came up with during those great chess boom days during the pandemic was what we call the bastion. Now, the technical term for a bastion is what we call an outpost. Now, when I play a4, this move is very good because white is not able to create any bastions for these knights. Now, you're probably wondering, what am I talking about? In this position, if I were to play a move like, let's just say rook d8, and white gets, say, a4, h6, and knight c4, let's say I go rook a6 and b3 here, look at these knights on b5 and c4, combined with the pawns on b3 and a4. The pawns support these knights, white has 2 bastions for the knights, and white is actually doing very well. So I play the move a4 here. White can no longer set up the pawns on b3 and a4, and these knights are going to be a little bit loose without any options to create a bastion. So the game continues with knight c4 here, and now I go bishop e6 to target the knight on c4. Pragg goes rook c1, and now I play the move rook a6. And what you'll notice here is with this pawn on a4, white cannot push the pawn. So these knights are never really stable, and without the bastion, the knights just aren't very good. So Pragg decides the castle, and here I play the move rook to d8. I'm also trying to create another legendary idea here, which was invented by XQC, also known as the kebab. Now, in this position, Pragg plays knight d3, allowing me to go for the kebab with rook to d2, hitting all the pawns at the same time, but I did not like this option. Now, keep in mind, at this point, most of my moves have been pretty easy, pretty stress-free, I guess you could say. I haven't had to burn a lot of time, and I'm already up nearly 40 minutes on the clock. Now, keep in mind, in my game against Vita, as well as my game against Abasov, I was up similar amounts of time. I think it was a little bit less, maybe 30 minutes, but in both of those games, I let all my time advantage dwindle away. I got low on time, and bad things happened. So even though in this position, I could sort of sense what we call the classic je ne sais quoi, to use a classic Canadian term, I could sense there was something in the position much like some other days, but I told myself in my mind I was not going to use a lot of time and get low on the clock. So I spent a bit of time here. I actually spent 30 minutes before playing rook a5, but I did maintain the time advantage. Now, rook a5 might not be the best move, but the move that I really wanted to play was rook d2, because I'd already played the bond cloud concept. There are no bastions, but I wanted the kebab. Unfortunately, after rook d2, I thought that here white could go knight c7, knight d4, looking to fork the king and the rook. But here white does not take the rook on a6, because then I take the pawn, and I'm probably winning the game. But white can play the move rook to c5 here. And after knight e2, king h1, it's simply a big mess here. And I felt that in this position, it's also easier for white to play. So if I go rook b6 and white takes, let's say I take with the pawn, there's knight c4, forking these rooks. And it gets very, very chaotic. On top of that, with less pieces on the board, there are also a very good chance for white to stabilize and not lose the game. So after quite a bit of a think, I went for my other option, which was rook to a5 here, simply targeting the horse on b5, because without the bastion, the horse will have to move, but additionally just keeping all the pieces on the board, keeping the game going, and trying to make my opponent use time. So Pragg takes the knight here. I take back. He goes knight c3, and now I play this move bishop to b3. Now, the reason I played bishop b3 is I wanted to guard the pawn, but I also want to go rook d2 and hit these pawns on the second rank. And on top of that, I've also created another famous XQC term, which is I have the wooden shield with the bishop on b3, which covers all the diagonals. So after bishop b3, Pragg goes knight b1, logical move. He doesn't want the kebab with rook d2, so the knight covers the square. Here I go rook to a6, and now I play this move f4. Now, keep in mind, at this point, I've got a nice cushion of 20 minutes on the clock, but the really important thing is we're only on move 21 here, so I don't want to end up in a situation where, say, move 24, 25, I use 20 minutes, and then I have one more surprise, I use another 20 minutes, and I lose the game due to time pressure. So I played this move rook a6 relatively quickly, and now Pragg goes f4, and here I play this move e4 after a nearly 2-minute thing. Now, this is a move that I knew was not the best move in the position, but I told myself, don't be stupid. Do not get in time pressure under any circumstances. So I play e4 here. Now, I knew this wasn't the best move. I actually thought takes was probably better here because white's pawn structure is not as good in this position. But nonetheless, it also activates the white rook, and the rook can start swinging across the board. So I play e4 here pretty quickly. Pragg goes king f2, and now I play rook b6 here. The idea is simple. I do want to play g6 down the road, but I always want to be able to potentially move my bishop away and go after this weak pawn on b2. So after rook b6, Pragg plays knight c3, and this is the start of where Pragg goes wrong. But one thing that's very important to note with this time control is that time really does matter. And when you can't think for 10 or 15 minutes on a single move at this point, because we're only in the mid-20s, you're going to make moves quickly, and there probably are going to be mistakes from both players. So Pragg goes knight c3, and now I go g6. The reason I play g6 here, by the way, is because one move that I wanted to play was rook d4, because if white moves the king and I drop the juicer back, now the rook guards both of the pawns on a4 and e4, but I also target the pawn on b2. But if I go rook d4 right away, white has knight to f5, forking the king, the pawn, and the rook, and winning the game. So I go g6 here to cut off knight to f5, and now Pragg plays rook to b1, and here I go knight d5. Now, Pragg played rook b1 because obviously he was scared of the infiltration with rook to d2, putting pressure on the pawns, but it really wasn't necessary to play. So Pragg goes rook b1, and now I play knight d5. And one of the most important things about this position is that my moves become very easy. So first of all, I have the wooden shield with a bishop on b3 that guards the pawn, covers a lot of squares. But now I'm going for another theme which Eric Rosen, another famous streamer, has made popular, which is we're going to try to play the game of the classic Connect 4, where if you connect these 4 pawns together, the game is over. You just win the game on the spot. Or wait, sorry, we're playing chess, not Connect 4, so those rules don't apply. But nonetheless, it is very pretty to create the chain of pawns. So after I play knight d5, here Pragg plays the move rook to c1 back, and this is Pragg trying to move quickly, dodge time pressure. He still has 13 minutes, but with 14 moves to go, he does not want to get really low on time, because without increment, if you get down to 1 or 2 minutes on the clock, it's going to be deadly, and you're simply going to make a blunder. So Pragg plays rook bc1. Now I go f5 here. I create the classic connect 4, and white is definitely struggling. Now here Pragg plays the move g4, going for activity, but this is a mistake. Now having said that, it's a move that I actually really understand from a human perspective, because at the end of the day, whether it's Praggnanandhaa, whether it's myself, or frankly whether it's anybody not named Magnus Carlsen, we are still human. And as a human, it's very hard to just sit on a position and play random moves like rook h1 or rook f1 and be like, ho-hum, fiddle-dee-dum, I don't care what's going on. You can't break through. I'm just fine. Now, for a computer that's 3500, it can do this because it doesn't care about ideas. It doesn't care where the pieces are because it sees the absolute best move no matter what. There are no emotions. Nothing else is involved. But from a human perspective here, with 13 minutes for 14 moves, Pragg decides to try and break the classic connect 4 here with g4. But this move starts to lead to complications, and now the game starts to spiral out of control. So I take the pawn on g4. Now, keep in mind, initially, I thought maybe I could trade the knights first on e3 and then take here, because if white plays knight takes e4, I have bishop to e6, guarding the pawn on g4, and now this pawn on b2 is very weak. But luckily, I realized that if I did this and I played this order with the trade and then taking the pawn, white can play this move f5, opening the f file for the rook, and now the knight can capture the pawn later, and if anything, I frankly think that white might be better here. So luckily, I spotted this idea, and I decided to take right away. Now, the reason I bring this up is because in this other order, after takes, fg4, knight e4, bishop e6, black is better, but white has this option to play f5. Whereas in the game, when I take right away, if white plays knight takes pawn, we can actually transpose via the other order, where I swap the horses and go bishop e6, and I have the advantage, but I've dodged this f5 tactic that existed if I played the other order. So Pragg plays knight g4, I take the juicer, and now I play this move king e3, which is simply a mistake. Now, the computer wants a very obvious-looking move, and I say that with a lot of sarcasm. This move, king to e1, bringing the king back to the center, targeting the knight on f4, and trying to win the pawn on e4. Now, frankly, for a human, I think this is complete nonsense. I don't think any human would play this, especially not with 10 minutes on the clock, but it does keep the balance, and white is only marginally worse. Instead, Pragg plays like a human. He goes king to e3, targeting the knight and the pawn. But now, even though it's an endgame, the king is in the center of the board, and it is going to come under fire in a minute. So here I play the move knight to d5 check. He eats the juicer. Obviously, he doesn't trade the horses, because now after pawn takes, or bishop takes, frankly, black is simply up a pawn here. The pawn on b2 is weak, and I have rook b3 to check the king as well. So Pragg decides to capture, king takes e4. Now, if we were playing the variant of chess on chess.com known as King of the Hill, white would win the game, but luckily we're playing normal chess, so the game continues. Here I trade the horse on c3, Pragg decides to take, and now I play the move c5. Now, the computer wants rook takes c3 here. Again, not the human move, because after bishop d5, we create the classic fossil where I check the king, and when the king moves back, I simply win the juicer on b2, and as a human, it feels like you've lost a pawn for nothing. So Pragg takes with the pawn, but now I find a very nice move, which is c5 here, creating this idea of checking the king by swinging the rook over to e6. Now, at this point, white's in a lot of trouble. One of the biggest reasons is because its rook on c1 is very passive. You don't have an open file, and you can't contest the d file because the bishop covers a square. So now both my rooks are headed towards the open lanes, and white is in a world of hurt. Now, it's not losing yet, but with little time on the clock and still so many moves to go, 9 moves to be precise before time control, it's very, very hard to play. And now Pragg effectively blunders and loses the game with this move rook to f4. Now, rook f4 e4 is a very logical move because what Pragg wants is for me to check, and then his king swings back to f3, and then let's say he puts the knight on e3, and the game goes on. The reason rook f4 makes so much sense is, let's just say you play like h4, for example. Now I can go rook e6, king f3, rook to f8, checking the king. And then here I can simply win the pawn on e2, probably go rook a2, and win the game. So Pragg plays rook f4. He intends to hide the king behind the rook, not get checked on the f-file, and he thinks he'll be okay. Unfortunately, A, I have a lot of time, but B, I'm actually very sharp and in the moment, and I do not miss my opportunity here as I play this move, bishop to d5, checking the king. Now, white has a couple of moves. If white were to go king e5, we have rook to e6, which is simply checkmate. King is stuck in the middle of the board. There are no squares available, and it's GG, why not? If white goes to d3 here, I can play the move g5, tickling the rook on f4, and white is basically getting fossilized like all the people in Pompeii 2,000 years ago, no matter where the rook goes. If you move the rook to f1, I can simply go bishop e6, checking the king, and winning the knight on g4. If you play rook takes a4, I have bishop to b3, fossilizing the rook on a4, and it's simply game over. So the only other move, which is what Pragg played, is king to e3. But now I play this nasty move h5, attacking this horse on g4. Now the big problem for white here is you can't go to f6 because then I win the horse on this f6 square. So you can't go here. If you go to e5, I pin the tail on the donkey with rook to e6. And after rook f7, king to d6, I'm simply winning this horse on e5. And with it, I'm winning the game as well. So you can't jump to either f6 or e5. And if you go to f2, now I check the king here. Unfortunately, if the king goes to d2, once again, there's another fossil here with g5, attacking the rook on f4. If white moves the rook to f5, bishop e4 is GG on the spot. And again, there's simply no good square. Rook a4, same problem. Bishop c6 or bishop b3. Rook just has no squares available, especially with the pawn on c5 covering d4 and b4. And so it would be game over. And if white blocks with a horse, I go g5 anyway. The knight is pinned, and here you will lose either the rook on f4 or the knight on e4, and with it the game. So Pragg plays the only move to not lose on the spot, which is this move c4 here, and now I go bishop to a8. Now basically same things apply. Knight f2, check, knight e4, g5 wins. If you go to e5, exact same issue with rook to e6, and you'll lose the horse on e5. So Pragg plays knight to h6 here, and now I go check, king f2, and the move rook f6. Now this is where you play the classic game of try to win this trapped horse on the edge of the board. So I go rook to f6, Pragg plays king g3, and now I play the move rook h8. Now at this point, the only thing I want to do is win this horse on h6. This horse is really out of play here. There's no squares to jump to, and if I can get the horse, I will win the game. So I decided to play the move rook h8. Now this may not technically be the best move here, but while there are other ways to probably win the game, I'm getting a little bit low on time, not super low. And when I play rook h8, it leads to a forced position here where white has to trade the towers, check, and I go king g7. Now, if white plays knight to f7, I play rook f8, the knight is pinned, and white will lose the game in short order. So Pragg has to go knight f5, I take the horse, takes, and I play the move rook c8. Now, when I was spending my time on rook h8, I saw this position, and while it's not winning immediately, and there might be a quicker win, I know that technically speaking, this endgame should be a win, because the bishop can go after these two pawns on c4 and e2 very, very easily via this diagonal. So I play this move rook to h8 here, and now we get trade, check here, knight f5, takes, rook c8. Pragg now decides to take, and I go bishop to b7 here, aiming to put the bishop on a6 and target the pawns, which are on the same color as the b. Now here, Pragg plays king f4. This move effectively does lose on the spot, but it really doesn't matter here. If white plays rook g5 and let's say rook g4, again, I can go rook to e8, targeting the pawn. Let's say white goes king f2. And there are many ways to win, but probably the cleanest is to go rook to e4 here. And after takes, king e3, king e5, h4, bishop g6. Black will simply win because the king has to yield. I'll eat the juicer on c4, and the bishop will stop the wide peepos. So Pragg goes king f4 instead. Doesn't really matter because all moves are kind of losing, but this hastens the defeat here as now after bishop to a6, Pragg goes king e5. He's really hoping that I'll take on c4 because after king d6, takes, and rook c5, this is still technically winning after rook h8, but if I accidentally trade the towers here, this is a simply known as a theoretical draw because the bishop is the wrong color here of the queening square. This bishop is a light square B, whereas the queening square for the pawn is a dark square, and the game ends in a draw. Now, keep in mind, of course, this endgame after rook c5, rook h8 is still winning, because what I'll do is I'll just put the bishop on b3 and take the pawn on h2 and eventually win this game, but there's no need to go for this. So after king e5, I instead go king g6, rook h4, and now I go king g5 here. Very important move because white can't guard the pawn, and beyond that, white can't win this pawn on c5 either, since I'm now harassing the rook with my king. So Pragg plays rook to h3. Now I take the pawn. At this point, Pragg probably could have resigned, but sort of, I think, out of inertia and just disappointment, he plays on. But the result now is never in doubt. I'm going to win this game. Pragg checks. I go king h6. He now goes e4, and I play his move rook c6. Now, this is maybe the last important move of the game to play because it cuts off this king from infiltrating on the 6th rank. If I go bishop f7, white still has king f6, bishop h5, and something like e5, e6, and there still are some chances to get a miracle, swindle, and maybe draw the game. But when I go rook c6 here, now the king has no squares. King cannot pass here, and the technique is very simple. I'm going to bring the bishop back, keep the rook to cut the king, and then just start pushing p up the c file. So Pragg goes king f5. Now I go bishop to f7 here. Again, king has no entries. The rook and the bishop simply cover the squares, and I'm just going to go c4, c3, c2, and c1. Pragg goes king e5. I play c4. He goes king d4. Now I check, and he plays the move king c5. White could go king c3 here, but after rook b6 followed by rook b3, this is also simply winning. So he goes king c5, I play rook d3, and now he goes king b4. And here I play the most precise move, which is rook to b3 check. Now, I could simply trade the rooks here and win the game with the king moving forward, because basically what happens here is that both of the wide pivots are simply blockaded by the bishop and the king, and white can never eat the juicer on a4, because then I have c3. King can't go back, bishop covers the square, and I just push p, get a queen, and win the game. But I'm not really in the mood at this point in the game to do anything silly, keep the game going, even to showcase a theme. So instead, I ended on the spot by playing rook to b3 check. Pragg takes the pawn on a4, and now I swap the rook on g3, and here Pragg resigns. Now, white could, of course, trade the rooks here, but after c takes b3, king c3, king g5, I'm just going to gobble the two juicers, and then with the two connected pawns, it'll be an easy win. So after rook b3, we get king a4, I take, and now Pragg resigns the game because after he takes the rook, I go c3, and the king cannot go to this b3 square. It's simply covered, and after king b4, c2, the pawn gets to the end of the board. It will promote to a queen, and I will win the game. So after rook takes g3, Pragg resigns the game, and with that victory, at least temporarily, I move into a share for first place in the event. Now, as I look at this, I do see that the final game of the round is still going. It does look like Jan Nepomniachtchi is going to win, so he's going to maintain his lead by a half point over me as we head into the 12th round tomorrow, where I will play with the white pieces against none other than Alireza Firouzja, who won a very nice crushing game against Nijat Abasov today. So I'm a half point out of the lead, but I am shared second place with D Gukesh, also from India. Tomorrow is going to be another big day. I have the white piece against Alireza, and we will simply see how it goes. So on that note, I hope you guys enjoyed this recap from the 11th round of the FIDE Canada Chess Tournament being held in Toronto, Canada. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with a recap after the 12th round. And last but not least, if you like my content and you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below. And we will be back tomorrow with another recap after this 12th round in the Canada Tournament. See you guys. Bye.